The church fell silent as Catherine Miller stood up from her seat in the back row. Her voice cut through the air like a knife as she spoke words that would destroy everything. Ladies and gentlemen, before you celebrate this union, there's something you all need to know about the groom. Daniel has been hiding a terrible secret from everyone, including his bride. The wedding guests turned to stare at the woman in the simple black dress. Daniel Harrison's face went white as snow. His new bride Jessica looked confused and scared. Daniel, Catherine continued, her voice getting stronger, tell them about the child. Tell them about the child you had with your own mother. The church erupted in gasps and screams. Jessica dropped her bouquet and covered her mouth in horror. But how did we get here? Let me tell you the whole story from the beginning. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth. 3 months earlier, Catherine Miller was sitting in her tiny apartment, trying to figure out how to pay her electricity bill. She had been living in this small place for 2 years now, ever since her divorce from Daniel Harrison was finalized. The apartment was nothing fancy, just 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room that barely fit a couch and a TV. Catherine worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. During the day, she cleaned offices downtown. At night, she waited tables at a small diner. Her hands were always tired from scrubbing floors and carrying heavy plates, but she never complained. She had learned to be strong after everything she went through with Daniel. The mailman knocked on her door that Tuesday morning. Catherine was getting ready for work, putting on her cleaning uniform when she heard the sound. "Package for Catherine Miller," the mailman said with a smile. Catherine looked at the fancy envelope in confusion. It was made of expensive paper with gold edges. Her name was written in beautiful handwriting across the front. She had never received anything so fancy before. She opened it carefully and pulled out a wedding invitation. The words made her heart stop beating for a moment. "Mr. Daniel Harrison and Miss Jessica Walsh request your presence at their wedding ceremony." Catherine read the invitation 3 times before it sank in. Daniel, her ex-husband, was getting married again, and he had invited her to the wedding. But that wasn't the strangest part. At the bottom of the invitation, someone had written a personal note in Daniel's handwriting. "Catherine, I know we didn't end things well, but I want you to see how happy I am now. Please come. It would mean a lot to me. Daniel." Catherine sat down on her couch and stared at the invitation. She couldn't understand why Daniel would want her at his wedding. Their divorce had been ugly and painful. He had said terrible things to her. He had called her worthless and stupid. He had made her feel like she was nothing. During their marriage, Daniel had been cruel in ways that still hurt Catherine's heart. He would come home from his job at the bank and find reasons to yell at her. If dinner wasn't ready exactly when he wanted it, he would throw the plates on the floor and make her clean it up. If she tried to talk to him about her day, he would tell her that her problems didn't matter because she didn't make any money. The worst part was how he treated her in front of other people. At parties or family gatherings, Daniel would make jokes about Catherine that weren't funny at all. He would tell people that she was just a simple girl who got lucky when she married him. He would laugh when she tried to join conversations about books or movies, saying that she wouldn't understand such things. Catherine had tried to make the marriage work for 3 long years. She cooked his favorite meals, kept the house clean, and never complained when he came home late from work smelling like another woman's perfume. She had hoped that if she was a good wife, Daniel would learn to love and respect her. But Daniel never changed. Instead, he got worse. The final straw came when Catherine found out she was pregnant. She was so happy and excited to tell Daniel the news. She had dreamed of having a family and thought that maybe a baby would bring them closer together. When she told Daniel about the pregnancy, his reaction shocked her. Instead of being happy, he became angry and accused her of trying to trap him. He said horrible things about how he didn't want children with someone like her. He said she wasn't good enough to be the mother of his children. 2 days later, Catherine lost the baby. The doctor said it was a miscarriage, but Catherine always wondered if the stress from Daniel's cruel words had somehow caused it. Daniel never apologized or showed any sadness about losing their child. He just went on with his life like nothing had happened. That's when Catherine knew she had to leave. She filed for divorce and moved out of their big house into her small apartment. Daniel didn't fight the divorce, but he made sure Catherine got as little money as possible. He had expensive lawyers who knew how to hide his money and assets. Now, 2 years later, Catherine was still struggling to build a new life for herself. Some days were harder than others, but she was proud that she had survived and was slowly getting stronger. Looking at the wedding invitation again, Catherine tried to figure out why Daniel had sent it. Was this his way of showing off his new life? Did he want her to see how much better he was doing without her? Or was there something else behind this invitation? Catherine's friend Maria stopped by that evening after her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. Maria was the only person who knew the whole truth about Catherine's marriage to Daniel. "You got a what?" Maria asked when Catherine showed her the invitation. "I know it's weird," Catherine said. "I can't figure out why he would invite me." Maria looked at the fancy invitation and shook her head. "This man made your life hell for 3 years, and now he wants you to watch him marry someone else? This doesn't make sense." "Maybe he's changed," Catherine said, though she didn't really believe it herself. "People like Daniel don't change," Maria said firmly. "They just find new ways to hurt people. I think this is some kind of trap." Catherine had been thinking the same thing, but hearing Maria say it out loud made it more real. "What kind of trap?" Catherine asked. "I don't know yet, but I know Daniel well enough to know that he doesn't do anything without a reason. And his reasons are never good." That night, Catherine lay in bed thinking about the invitation. Part of her wanted to throw it away and forget about it. She had worked so hard to move on from Daniel and build a new life. Going to his wedding would just bring back all the painful memories. But another part of her was curious. She wanted to see what kind of woman Daniel was marrying now. She wanted to see if he would treat his new wife better than he had treated her. And if she was being honest with herself, she wanted to show Daniel that she had survived his cruelty and was doing fine without him. The next morning, Catherine decided to do some research. She went to the library and used their computer to look up information about Jessica Walsh, Daniel's bride-to-be. What she found surprised her. Jessica came from a very wealthy family. Her father owned several car dealerships around the city. She had gone to expensive private schools and had never worked a regular job. Her social media pages were full of pictures from fancy vacations and expensive restaurants. This made Catherine even more confused. If Daniel was marrying someone so wealthy, why would he want his poor ex-wife at the wedding? It didn't make sense unless he had some cruel plan in mind. Catherine spent the next few days going back and forth about whether to attend the wedding. She talked to Maria about it every day, and Maria kept telling her it was a bad idea. "He's up to something," Maria warned. "Daniel Harrison doesn't invite people to parties unless he plans to embarrass them somehow." But Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to go. Something deep inside her told her that this wedding was important, though she couldn't explain why. Finally, she made her decision. She would attend Daniel's wedding, but not because he wanted her there. She would go to prove to herself that she was strong enough to face him again. She would go to show Daniel that his cruelty hadn't broken her completely. Catherine had one problem, though. She didn't have anything nice enough to wear to such a fancy wedding. All her clothes were simple and cheap because she couldn't afford anything better. She couldn't show up to Daniel's wedding in her work clothes or the old dresses she wore to church sometimes. Maria offered to lend Catherine some money to buy a new dress, but Catherine refused. She had worked hard to pay off her debts and didn't want to borrow money, even from her best friend. Instead, Catherine went to several thrift stores and consignment shops, looking for something appropriate. After 3 days of searching, she found a simple black dress that fit her perfectly. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was elegant and made Catherine feel confident. She also spent some of her tip money from the diner to get her hair done at a small salon. The stylist, an older woman named Rosa, listened to Catherine's story while she worked. "Honey," Rosa said as she styled Catherine's hair, "I've been doing hair for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of women in your situation. My advice is to hold your head high and show that man what he lost when he let you go." The week before the wedding, Catherine started having second thoughts again. What if Maria was right? What if Daniel was planning to humiliate her in front of all his friends and family? What if going to the wedding would just give him another chance to hurt her? But every time Catherine thought about backing out, she remembered something that gave her strength. She remembered the day she finally left Daniel, when she packed her few belongings and walked out of their house for the last time. She remembered the feeling of freedom when the divorce papers were signed. She remembered all the small victories she had achieved since then. Getting her apartment, keeping her jobs, making friends like Maria. Catherine realized that she wasn't the same scared woman who had lived with Daniel's cruelty for 3 years. She was stronger now. She had learned to stand up for herself. If Daniel wanted to play games with her, she was ready to play back. The night before the wedding, Catherine got a phone call that changed everything. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "Hello, Catherine. It's me." Daniel's voice sounded exactly the same as it had 2 years ago, smooth and confident, but with an edge that always made Catherine feel uneasy. "What do you want, Daniel?" Catherine asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just wanted to make sure you got my invitation. I wasn't sure if you still lived at that address." "I got it," Catherine said. "Why did you invite me to your wedding?" Daniel laughed, and the sound made Catherine's skin crawl. "Can't an ex-husband invite his former wife to celebrate his happiness? I thought you might enjoy seeing how well I'm doing these days." There it was, the real reason. Daniel wanted to show off. He wanted Catherine to see his new life, his wealthy bride, his success, while she struggled to pay her bills. "I'll be there," Catherine said quietly. "Good," Daniel said. "I have a special surprise planned. Something I think you'll find very educational." The line went dead, and Catherine stared at the phone in her hand. Daniel's words sent a chill down her spine. What kind of surprise was he planning? What did he mean by educational? Catherine barely slept that night. She kept thinking about Daniel's phone call and the way he had laughed when he talked about his surprise. She had a bad feeling about what tomorrow would bring, but she had already decided to go. She wouldn't let fear stop her now. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and cloudy. Catherine put on her black dress and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked good, not rich or fancy, but dignified and strong. Her reflection reminded her that she was not the same broken woman who had left Daniel's house 2 years ago. Maria called to check on her one last time. "Are you sure about this?" Maria asked. "I'm sure," Catherine replied, though her heart was beating fast with nervousness. "Just promise me that if things get bad, you'll leave right away. Don't let him hurt you again." "I promise," Catherine said. The wedding was being held at St. Mary's Cathedral, the most expensive church in the city. Catherine had never been inside before, but she had driven past it many times and always admired its beautiful architecture. When Catherine arrived at the church, she was amazed by how many people were there. The parking lot was full of expensive cars, Mercedes, BMWs, and even a few luxury cars she couldn't identify. Everyone walking into the church was dressed in designer clothes and expensive jewelry. Catherine suddenly felt very out of place in her thrift store dress. But she reminded herself that she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to prove her own strength. Inside the church, Catherine found a seat in the back row. She wanted to be able to see everything, but also wanted to be able to leave quickly if she needed to. The church was decorated with hundreds of white roses and gold ribbons. Everything looked perfect and expensive. As more guests arrived, Catherine began to recognize some faces. There was Daniel's mother, Mrs. Harrison, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Catherine made in 6 months. There were Daniel's friends from the bank, all wearing expensive suits and talking loudly about their golf games and vacation homes. Catherine noticed that all the guests seemed to be wealthy and important. She didn't see anyone who looked like regular working people. This was definitely Daniel's crowd. Rich, privileged, and completely different from the world Catherine lived in now. 20 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start, Catherine spotted Daniel at the front of the church talking to the minister. He looked exactly the same as he had 2 years ago, tall, handsome, and perfectly groomed. His tuxedo was clearly custom-made and probably cost more than Catherine's rent for 3 months. Daniel was laughing and shaking hands with important-looking men. He seemed completely happy and confident. like a man who had never doubted himself or worried about anything in his entire life. Then Catherine saw the bride. Jessica Walsh was absolutely beautiful. She was young, probably only in her early 20s, with long blonde hair and perfect makeup. Her wedding dress was stunning, covered in pearls and lace that must have taken months to create. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. Looking at Jessica, Catherine felt a pang of sadness. Not jealousy exactly, but sadness for this young woman who had no idea what kind of man she was marrying. Jessica looked so happy and excited, just like Catherine had felt on her own wedding day before she learned the truth about Daniel's nature. The ceremony began with beautiful music from a full orchestra. Catherine had never been to such an elaborate wedding before. Everything was perfect: the flowers, the music, the decorations. It was like something from a movie. As Jessica walked down the aisle, Catherine watched Daniel's face. He was smiling, but Catherine knew him well enough to see that his smile didn't reach his eyes. He was performing for his audience, playing the role of the happy groom. The minister began the ceremony with traditional words about love and marriage. Catherine found herself thinking about her own wedding day and how different it had been. She and Daniel had gotten married in a small ceremony with just a few family members present. At the time, Catherine had thought it was romantic and intimate. Now she realized that Daniel had kept their wedding small because he was already ashamed of her. Halfway through the ceremony, Catherine noticed Daniel looking around the church. His eyes scanned the rows of guests until they found her in the back. When he saw her, his smile changed. It became wider but also colder. He gave her a small nod that sent chills down her spine. Catherine realized that Daniel's phone call the night before wasn't just to confirm she would attend. He had been checking to make sure his audience was complete. Whatever surprise he had planned, it required Catherine to be there to witness it. The minister asked if anyone had any reason why Daniel and Jessica should not be married. This was usually just a formality. Nobody ever actually spoke up during this part of the ceremony. But Catherine felt her heart start beating faster. She had a terrible feeling that something was about to happen. The minister waited the traditional moment, then started to continue with the ceremony. But then Daniel held up his hand. "Actually, Reverend, before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge some special guests," Daniel said in his smooth, confident voice. Catherine's blood turned to ice. This was it. This was Daniel's surprise. Daniel turned to face the congregation with a big smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you all to know that we have someone very special with us today. My ex-wife Catherine Miller has joined us to celebrate this joyous occasion." Every head in the church turned to look at Catherine. She felt her face burn with embarrassment as hundreds of eyes stared at her. She heard whispers and murmurs from the other guests. "Catherine," Daniel continued, his voice carrying clearly through the church, "I know our marriage didn't work out, but I wanted you to be here today so you could see what a real marriage looks like. I wanted you to understand what true love and success actually mean." Catherine felt like she couldn't breathe. Daniel was humiliating her in front of all these people, just like Maria had warned he would. He was using his wedding day to make her feel small and worthless, just like he had done throughout their marriage. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling broken or defeated, Catherine felt angry. She was tired of letting Daniel hurt her. She was tired of being his victim. Catherine stood up from her seat. The church fell completely silent. Even Jessica turned around to look at her, confusion clear on her beautiful face. "Thank you for inviting me, Daniel," Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent church. "And you're right. I have learned a lot about what real marriage should look like. I've learned what love isn't." Daniel's confident smile faltered slightly. This wasn't going the way he had planned. "But since you want to share personal information with your wedding guests," Catherine continued, walking slowly toward the front of the church, "I think there's something they should know about you too." Now Daniel's face went completely white. "Catherine, this isn't the time or place." "Oh, but you made it the time and place when you decided to embarrass me in front of all these people," Catherine said, her voice getting stronger with each word. She reached the front of the church and turned to face all the guests. Her heart was pounding, but she felt more powerful than she had in years. "Ladies and gentlemen, before you celebrate this union, there's something you all need to know about the groom." Catherine took a deep breath and looked directly at Daniel. His face had gone completely pale, and she could see panic in his eyes. For the first time in her life, Catherine had power over Daniel Harrison, and she wasn't going to waste it. "You see," Catherine continued, her voice steady and clear, "during our marriage, I discovered something about Daniel that he's been hiding from everyone. Something so terrible that I've kept it secret for 2 years because I couldn't believe it was true." The church was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Jessica was staring at Catherine with wide, frightened eyes. Daniel's mother, Mrs. Harrison, had grabbed the arm of the man sitting next to her. "Catherine, stop this right now," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "You're making a scene at my wedding." "Like you just made a scene with me?" Catherine shot back. "You invited me here to humiliate me, Daniel. You wanted to show everyone how much better your life is without me. Well, now they're going to learn the truth about who you really are." Catherine turned back to face the guests. Her hands were shaking, but her voice remained strong. 2 years ago, when I was still married to Daniel, I came home early from work one day. I wasn't feeling well, so I left my job at the store and came back to our house. I thought Daniel was at work, but when I walked into our bedroom, Catherine paused, remembering that awful day. The memory still made her feel sick to her stomach. "I found Daniel in bed with his own mother." The church erupted in gasps and screams. Several women covered their mouths in shock. Some people stood up from their seats, looking horrified. Jessica let out a piercing scream and dropped her bouquet of flowers. "That's a lie," Daniel shouted, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "She's making this up because she's jealous." But Catherine wasn't finished. She had carried this terrible secret for 2 years, and now that she had started telling it, she couldn't stop. "It wasn't just once," Catherine continued, ignoring Daniel's protests. "I discovered that Daniel had been having a relationship with his mother, Mrs. Harrison, for years, even before we got married." Mrs. Harrison stood up from her seat, her face white as a ghost. "This is not true," she screamed. "This woman is lying." But Catherine could see in Mrs. Harrison's eyes that she was terrified. Catherine knew she was telling the truth, and Mrs. Harrison knew it too. "The worst part," Catherine said, her voice breaking with emotion, "is that they had a child together. Daniel has a son with his own mother." The church descended into complete chaos. People were screaming, crying, and rushing toward the exits. Jessica fell to her knees in her beautiful wedding dress, sobbing uncontrollably. "Where is this child?" someone from the crowd shouted. Catherine looked directly at Daniel, who was now shaking with rage and fear. "His name is Timothy," Catherine said. "He's 7 years old now." Daniel and his mother told everyone that Mrs. Harrison adopted him from a family that couldn't take care of him. But Timothy is actually Daniel's son and his half-brother at the same time. Daniel lunged toward Catherine, but 2 of the groomsmen grabbed him and held him back. "You have no proof," Daniel screamed. "This is all lies." Catherine reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her hands were shaking, but she managed to unfold it. "I have a DNA test," Catherine announced to the crowd. 2 years ago, after I discovered the truth, I secretly collected hair samples from Daniel, Mrs. Harrison, and little Timothy. I had them tested at a private lab. Catherine held up the paper for everyone to see. "The test proves that Daniel Harrison is Timothy's father, and Mrs. Harrison is Timothy's mother, which means Daniel had a child with his own mother." The church was in complete pandemonium now. Jessica was still on her knees, crying so hard she could barely breathe. The minister had stepped away from the altar and was talking frantically to someone on his phone, probably calling the police. Mrs. Harrison tried to run toward the exit, but several guests blocked her path. They were all shouting questions and accusations at her. "Where is Timothy now?" Catherine called out, her voice rising above the chaos. "He's at home with the babysitter," Mrs. Harrison sobbed. "Please just let us go. This is all a mistake." But it wasn't a mistake, and everyone in the church knew it now. The way Daniel and his mother were acting made it clear that Catherine was telling the truth. Jessica finally managed to stand up. Her beautiful wedding dress was dirty from kneeling on the floor, and her makeup was ruined from crying. She looked at Daniel with disgust and horror. "You're sick," Jessica whispered to Daniel. "You're both sick." She pulled off her engagement ring and threw it at Daniel's feet, then ran out of the church. Her family followed behind her, all of them looking shocked and disgusted. More and more guests were leaving now. Nobody wanted to be part of this terrible scene. The beautiful wedding that had started just an hour ago was completely destroyed. Daniel was still being held back by his groomsmen, but he was staring at Catherine with pure hatred in his eyes. "Why?" he asked her. "Why did you do this to me?" Catherine looked at the man who had made her life miserable for 3 years. The man who had called her worthless and stupid. The man who had invited her to his wedding just so he could humiliate her one more time. "Because you deserve it," Catherine said simply. "You tried to hurt me today, just like you hurt me for 3 years during our marriage. But I'm not the same woman you used to control and abuse. I'm stronger now." Catherine walked closer to Daniel, no longer afraid of him. "You thought you could invite me here and make me feel small and worthless in front of all your rich friends. You thought you could show me how much better your life is without me. But instead, everyone now knows the truth about what kind of man you really are." Daniel's shoulders sagged in defeat. He knew that his life was ruined. Word of this scandal would spread quickly through the wealthy community he was part of. His job at the bank, his reputation, his new marriage, everything was destroyed. The police arrived a few minutes later. Someone had called them when the chaos started. They immediately began asking questions and taking statements from witnesses. Catherine gave her statement to the officers, showing them the DNA test results. She told them about the day she discovered Daniel and his mother together, and about the child they had been hiding. "We'll need to investigate this further," one of the officers told Catherine. "Child Protective Services will need to get involved to make sure Timothy is safe." Catherine felt a wave of sadness thinking about little Timothy. None of this was his fault. He was an innocent child who had been born into a terrible situation. She hoped that somehow he would be able to have a normal life despite everything. Mrs. Harrison was arrested and taken away in handcuffs. She was crying and begging for forgiveness, but it was too late. Her secret was out, and she would have to face the consequences. Daniel wasn't arrested that day, but Catherine knew that would probably change once the police finished their investigation. What he and his mother had done was illegal in many ways, and there would be serious legal consequences. As the church finally emptied out, Catherine found herself alone with Daniel for the first time in 2 years. The groomsmen had left with the police, and everyone else had gone home to process what they had witnessed. Daniel was sitting in the front pew, still wearing his expensive tuxedo, but he looked completely broken. His perfect wedding day had turned into his worst nightmare. "I hope it was worth it," Daniel said quietly, not looking at Catherine. "What was worth it?" Catherine asked. "Destroying my life. I hope it made you feel better." Catherine sat down in the pew behind Daniel. She was surprised to find that she didn't feel happy or victorious. She felt tired and sad. "I didn't want to destroy your life, Daniel. I just wanted you to stop trying to destroy mine." Daniel finally turned to look at her. His eyes were red from crying, and he looked older than she remembered. "I never meant for things to get so bad between us," Daniel said. "I know I wasn't a good husband to you. You were cruel to me every single day for 3 years," Catherine replied. "You made me feel like I was worth nothing, and then you invited me here today to do it again in front of hundreds of people." "I was angry," Daniel said. "I was angry that you left me, and I wanted to hurt you back. But I left because you were hurting me," Catherine said. "I left because you were destroying my spirit little by little every day." They sat in silence for a few minutes, surrounded by the broken remains of what should have been Daniel's wedding day. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "Now you have to face the consequences of your actions," Catherine said. "Just like I had to face the consequences when I decided to leave you." Catherine stood up to leave. She had said everything she needed to say, and she was ready to go home to her small apartment and her simple life. "Catherine," Daniel called out as she walked toward the exit. She turned back to look at him one last time. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "I'm sorry for everything I did to you during our marriage. You didn't deserve any of it." Catherine looked at the broken man sitting alone in the ruins of his wedding day. 2 years ago, she would have felt sorry for him. She would have forgiven him and maybe even tried to help him. But she was different now. She was stronger. "Thank you for the apology," Catherine said. "But it's too late. You had 3 years to treat me with kindness and respect, and you chose cruelty instead. You had the chance to be honest with Jessica about who you really are, and you chose to lie instead. This is where your choices have led you." Catherine walked out of the church and into the gray afternoon. The parking lot was nearly empty now, with only a few cars belonging to people who were still inside giving statements to the police. As Catherine walked to her old car, she thought about everything that had happened. She had come to Daniel's wedding expecting to be humiliated, and instead, she had been the one to expose the truth that would change everything. Her phone rang as she got into her car. It was Maria. "Catherine, I just heard from my neighbor who was working at the catering company today. She said there was some kind of huge scandal at the wedding. Are you okay? What happened?" Catherine took a deep breath and started her car. "It's a long story," Catherine said, "but I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm finally free." As Catherine drove home through the city streets, she felt lighter than she had in years. The terrible secret she had been carrying was finally out in the open. Daniel could never hurt her again because he no longer had any power over her. She thought about Jessica and felt sorry for the young woman. Jessica's perfect wedding day had been destroyed, but Catherine believed that Jessica was lucky to find out the truth about Daniel before she was legally tied to him. Now Jessica could find someone who would treat her with the love and respect she deserved. Catherine also thought about little Timothy, and she hoped that Child Protective Services would make sure he got the help and support he needed. Timothy deserved a chance at a normal, healthy life, away from the toxic situation he had been born into. When Catherine got home to her small apartment, she made herself a cup of tea and sat on her couch, still wearing her black dress. She felt exhausted but also relieved. The chapter of her life that included Daniel Harrison was finally, completely closed. Over the next few days, the story of what happened at Daniel's wedding spread throughout the city. It was in the newspapers and on the local television news. People who had attended the wedding gave interviews describing the shocking scene they had witnessed. Catherine received dozens of phone calls from reporters wanting to interview her, but she declined them all. She had said everything she needed to say at the wedding. Now she just wanted to move forward with her life in peace. Daniel's bank fired him immediately when they learned about the scandal. Mrs. Harrison was charged with several crimes related to child abuse and was awaiting trial. Timothy was placed in protective custody while social workers tried to figure out the best way to help him. Jessica's family released a statement saying that the wedding had been canceled and that Jessica was grateful to have learned the truth before making a terrible mistake. Catherine was glad that Jessica had escaped from Daniel before he could hurt her too. 2 weeks after the wedding, Catherine got a new job. A woman who had heard about Catherine's story on the news offered her a position at her small business. The pay was better than Catherine's 2 previous jobs combined, and for the first time in years, Catherine wouldn't have to worry about paying her bills. "I admire what you did," the woman, Mrs. Patricia Davis, told Catherine during her interview. "It takes courage to stand up to someone who has hurt you, especially in front of so many people. I need employees who are brave and honest, and I think you're both of those things." Catherine was grateful for the opportunity and threw herself into her new job with enthusiasm. She was good at the work, and her boss appreciated her dedication and reliability. 3 months later, Catherine moved out of her tiny apartment and into a larger place in a nicer part of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable and bright, with big windows that let in lots of sunlight. Maria helped Catherine move, and they celebrated with pizza and wine in Catherine's new living room. "You look different," Maria told Catherine as they sat on the floor surrounded by moving boxes. "Different how?" Catherine asked. "Happier, lighter, like you're finally free from something that was weighing you down." Catherine smiled. Maria was right. For the first time since her wedding day 7 years ago, Catherine felt truly happy and free. "I think I am free," Catherine said. "I spent so many years being afraid of Daniel and what he might do to hurt me. Even after our divorce, I was still scared of him. But now I realize that he only had power over me because I gave it to him." "And you took that power back at his wedding," Maria said. "I did. And now I can finally move on with my life without looking over my shoulder." Catherine never saw or heard from Daniel again after that day in the church. She heard through friends that he had left the city, probably to start over somewhere else where people didn't know about his scandal. She hoped that wherever he went, he would get the help he needed to address his serious problems. She also hoped he would never have the opportunity to hurt another woman the way he had hurt her. As for Timothy, Catherine learned that he had been placed with a loving foster family who specialized in helping children who had been through trauma. The foster parents were working with therapists to help Timothy heal from the damage that had been done to him. Catherine sometimes thought about reaching out to Timothy when he was older, to let him know that there were people in the world who cared about his well-being. But for now, she thought it was best to let him heal and grow in peace. 1 year after the wedding incident, Catherine met a man named Robert at her new job. He was kind, gentle, and treated Catherine with the respect and love she had always deserved. When Catherine told Robert about her past with Daniel, he listened with compassion and never made her feel ashamed or broken. "Your past doesn't define you," Robert told Catherine. "What defines you is how you survived it and came out stronger on the other side." Catherine and Robert took their relationship slowly, building trust and friendship before anything else. Catherine had learned to value herself and wouldn't settle for anything less than genuine love and respect. 2 years after Daniel's ruined wedding, Catherine and Robert got engaged. Their engagement was nothing like Catherine's first one. It was based on mutual love, trust, and respect rather than control and manipulation. As Catherine planned her second wedding, she thought about how different her life had become. She was no longer the scared, broken woman who had lived under Daniel's cruelty for 3 years. She was strong, confident, and surrounded by people who truly cared about her. Sometimes Catherine wondered what would have happened if she hadn't gone to Daniel's wedding that day. Would she have ever found the courage to fully move on from their toxic marriage? Would Daniel have continued to have power over her thoughts and fears? She was glad she would never have to find out. By standing up to Daniel in front of all those people, Catherine had reclaimed her power and her voice. She had refused to be his victim any longer. The woman who walked down the aisle to marry Robert was completely different from the woman who had walked down the aisle to marry Daniel 7 years earlier. This time, Catherine knew who she was and what she deserved. This time, she was marrying someone who loved and respected her exactly as she was. As Catherine and Robert exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through good times and bad, Catherine thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She had survived Daniel's cruelty, found the strength to leave him, struggled to rebuild her life, and finally found the courage to stand up to him when he tried to hurt her one last time. The woman who had been too scared to speak up for herself during 3 years of marriage had found her voice and used it to tell the truth when it mattered most. Catherine's new life wasn't perfect. No life is, but it was hers, and it was built on a foundation of honesty, respect, and genuine love. She had learned that she was worth so much more than Daniel had ever made her believe. And that was the greatest victory of all. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Thank you for watching Catherine's incredible journey of finding her strength and standing up for herself. Sometimes the people who try to hurt us the most end up giving us the greatest gifts, the gift of discovering just how strong we really are.